We're joined today by Dr. Davie Jane Gilmour, president of Pennsylvania College of Technology. In light of the coronavirus pandemic, what does the fall return to school look like for higher education this year?
For higher education, it's certainly a different, complex time. And here at Penn College, we've made the decision that we're going to return in the fall for in-person instruction. And so we've been focusing significantly on how to make our campus inviting and safe and appropriate for our students. But as in our type of education, hands-on education, being here on campus is critical. We can't teach you how to fix an airplane remotely, and we can't teach you how to bake and serve in the kinds of professions and programs that we have in that sort of remote instruction. This spring, we were able to finish 93% of our classes online, but any number of our students are back on campus now, once they can be, finishing their laboratory classes, and some will come back early in the fall to finish as well. We think it's important that that hands-on component still happen.
You were among a number of testifiers who appeared before the Senate Education Committee in the past week or so. What were the biggest concerns that the testifiers expressed?
I think there's a number of things. First of all, making sure that students and their parents in particular feel comfortable sending their children back to college or to college for the first time. We have a strong responsibility to make sure that the environments that we have, the facilities that we have are going to be safe, are going to be appropriate, and yet still provide a collegiate experience for people. I think the second issue is one that was expressed a number of times, and that's the whole concept of liability. How is this a partnership between both the students and the colleges to make sure that everybody is holding up sort of their end of the bargain? And I think that this is a mutually responsible activity that we will be already talking about in our freshman orientation, for example, how we will help keep you healthy and safe, but you have a responsibility as well. And then there's no question that at the hearing we heard about the financial impacts of doing all of those things.
Now, you brought up the issue of liability. Has there been any precedent, or have you gotten any guidance perhaps from federal officials regarding what kind of liability the school has if either a student or an employee were to contract the coronavirus on campus?
No, to my knowledge, at least, there's no information for us, and so we're taking the position that we're going to look at that liability like we do all other elements about liability. And when you consider our campus, where we have a fully operational sawmill, where we have a plastics program, an automotive program, we have significant healthcare programs, we already have a little bit of a different liability, if you will, in most colleges and universities, and so we are considering it, but it is not an obstacle for us.
What kind of guidance have you received from perhaps state and federal officials regarding how to operate once students return to campus?
We're following the CDC guidelines. We're following the State Department of Education guidelines, and then we are combing all the resources we can have. The state of Connecticut, for example, has a very detailed plan on colleges opening, and the American College Health Association has one. So I can tell you that my stack of reading for how to open colleges in the fall is pretty significant. We are certainly following very tightly the Department of Ed's guidelines and the CDC guidelines, but anytime we can read any of those other documents, we might glean another little thing that we could do on campus or something we could modify. So we're reading everything we can find.
How does student enrollment for this upcoming fall compare to what a typical enrollment would be like prior to the pandemic?
Right now we're tracking enrollment, and I expect it will be lower than last year. I expect we're going to be a little bit better off than some of the national enrollment projections that you're hearing. I would be optimistic in saying that we will do well, but we're not going to have the same target level of enrollment. And I think there's a couple of reasons. We're talking to students who are now talking about a gap year. Some are saying, for example, I don't want to come to school and then have to be shut down and go back to online. So maybe I'll wait a year because I really want the full college experience. Others are saying, I'm just not 100% comfortable yet, so I want to delay my enrollment. Those will impact the overall enrollment of the campus.
How receptive have students been to the prospects of potentially online education?
It's mixture. I actually interacted with some students in a non-work environment. I was doing some grocery shopping literally and had some students say to me, Dr. Gilmour, it was pretty good. We really missed being on campus, but it was better than we thought. And if you were a serious student, we worked through it, but we can't wait to come back in the fall. We've done research. We did a survey of the students and a survey of the faculty, and we're doing those analysis right now to see, what we can learn from that. There's no question that we offer some programs distance learning, but the majority of our programs are really grounded in hands-on applied technology education, and that needs to be on campus.
The state budget this year is being conducted with a two-pronged approach. The first part has been agreed to and signed by the governor already, giving higher education flat funding for the next 5 months. The second portion of the budget will be reconsidered in November. How is that level for what your expectations are? Is it adequate for funding the school and keeping things afloat for the foreseeable future?
To be candid, we were very grateful to have flat funding because given the conversations and the discussions, we were certainly concerned that there could be a decrease in our funding. And as a institution like Penn College, who is heavily tuition dependent, we get about 18% of our budget from the state. That flat funding was really important to us. So I was thrilled to say thank you for maintaining our level of budget. That gives us a platform or a level from which we can work. And so on that hand, we were very grateful. It remains to be seen what will happen in the future, but I'm fairly confident that the flat funding is going to get us where we need to get this year.
What assurances can you give students and families of students who will be returning to school in the fall that they will be living in a safe environment?
Well, we've already started, and that's, I think, the best assurance we can give. As soon as we turned green, and in fact, in some of the yellow phases, if we're familiar with those languages, we had permission to have some of our programs come back to campus, our health programs, some of our nursing, our physician assistant students. So we've actually been testing our protocols and our processes since the end of May. And now we have additional students back that were in the green. So we have some aviation students, some welding students, some baking and pastry arts students. So what I'm telling parents when I talk to them is we're going through our sort of early soft phase in, if you will. So we're finding any little wrinkles that we have. And I'm really proud to say that our team has worked exhaustively. We've yet to find very many wrinkles. So I feel like we're ready. We've got the protocols in place, if you came on our campus, the signage in place, the activities in place. We feel like we're really well positioned because we've had sort of this soft start.
Dr. Davie Jane Gilmour serves as president of the Pennsylvania College of Technology. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're joined today by Representative Bryan Cutler, House Majority Leader. Over the past week, the House and Senate concurred on a resolution to end the governor's disaster declaration. Can you explain what that will do?
Yes. The process is actually very simple. It's outlined in the Emergency Management Code. It says that the governor has the power to declare an emergency, and the General Assembly, through concurrent resolution, can terminate it. And then upon that passage of the resolution, the governor shall issue an order terminating the emergency. That's currently where we're at. We are going through the necessary publishing requirements that's outlined at the end of the bill, where we would post it in the legislative bulletin as well as newspapers of general circulation. And we are waiting for the governor to issue his order. Earlier this week, he'd indicated that he does not intend to issue such an order. So there are court proceedings currently being undertaken to ensure his compliance with the law.
Can you explain the significance of this being a resolution and not a bill and what difference that makes?
Yes, actually. And that's actually a great question because I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. The legislative process, which is outlined in the Constitution, is very clear that a bill would go from the House to the Senate, and assuming that it passes both chambers, it would then go to the governor's desk for signature. In this particular case, what you're talking about is not constitutional authority, such as the legislative process that I just described, but rather legislative and executive action. The statute was passed back in 1978, and it is what defines the process that we're currently undertaking regarding the emergency declaration. And in that statute that passed unanimously and had very little debate at the time and was signed by, I believe, a Democratic governor, it outlined this process of the governor starting and the legislature ending emergency declaration. This is us taking those required actions under that statute that has already been enacted. So that is why it's different. And in terms of us passing the resolution, us being the House and the Senate, that is the function that we have to do and which we undertook. And then the next step in the statute is the governor shall issue the order.
There are currently 46 counties that are in the green phase of reopening, and others are expected to follow suit. What is the significance of the timing? Why move this now?
Well, it's something that we've worked on for some time, both through the legislative process as well as the resolution itself. We have tried very hard to work with the governor in a variety of areas to make sure that everyone's treated equally across the Commonwealth. And I understand the different color phasings and some of the issues that the governor raises about possibly terminating the current declaration. But the truth is that there's not been a lot of transparency in the process that the governor's undertaken. There's not been a lot of information that's shared. And I don't believe that our founders ever intended for one individual to run the entire state. That's why we have co-equal branches of government and a process like this that's enshrined in our laws. And for us, it's about making sure that businesses that are similarly situated and that want to and can safely do so, they can reopen. It never made sense to me that Walmart could be open, but a garden center selling garden plants could not, when literally hundreds of people could go to the big box store, and you may only have a handful of people show up at a roadside store, such as a garden center. So there was some serious concerns about the actual implementation of it. That's really what most of the legislative debate has been focused about, because we acknowledge that obviously this is an emergency. We acknowledge that there are problems that we have to overcome, both health and financial, as well as other societal issues in terms of how we continue to operate under such a disease. And we, I think, demonstrated very ably that we can work very quickly and get bills through in the opening weeks. But as it languished on and there was some more confusion and not as much communication as we probably should have had, I think that that's where a lot of the frustration has come. And it's important because throughout this 13-week period, those votes have continued to become higher in terms of total number of votes in favor of opening businesses or termination itself, and it's been bipartisan. And I think that speaks volumes.
You've said that ending the disaster declaration was important in helping Pennsylvanians recover. How do you respond to people who may have concerns either because they're part of a vulnerable population or perhaps they simply have concerns about the virus?
Well, some of these are issues that the governor himself outlined, and I think we only have to go back to the law to look at what can happen. The law says he has to end the current declaration. There's nothing that prevents him from immediately issuing a new declaration to help those individuals who are in a vulnerable population. And I would agree. I mean, I have family members, who have comorbidities or other health problems that high blood pressure, lung, diabetes, any kind of issues like that, you're at a higher risk. I myself have asthma, so that's something that's obviously something I need to take into consideration. So you can create a new order that addresses all of the issues that the governor and we may also have. But secondarily, we can also pass bills. We've demonstrated time and time again through this pandemic that we can. We put rules in place that we could operate remotely. We've had a very successful session in terms of getting bills passed and signed into law, and there's nothing that would stop that from happening as well. We stand here ready, willing, and able to work with the governor on any problem that is indicated to us that needs fixed.
The governor said that by ending his disaster declaration prematurely would prevent his ability to provide COVID-19 related services. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do not, because of the process that I just outlined previously. He could immediately issue a new order that is more refined and consistent with what the current crisis is, not the one that started 13 weeks ago.
As this resolution goes to the courts, what kind of legal precedent do you look to as providing hope that this will hold water for you?
Well, the closest thing we have is the court case that I quoted on the House floor during my remarks, the Danny DeVito case. And the court laid out very simply the process that I just outlined, that the governor can start it and the General Assembly can finish it. In their opinion, they did not say the General Assembly plus the governor can finish it. I think that they recognize what the law says, and I'm confident that we will prevail as we go forward. But again, to the extent that there's any unresolved issues or concerns, they can be immediately addressed under the existing law itself, or by working together with the legislature for other statutory changes that are needed. The idea that something would continue beyond this just because the original declaration was terminated is simply inconsistent. It's inconsistent with the past actions of the governor himself. He just renewed the emergency declaration. So he obviously recognized, like we do, that there are continuing issues. What we're asking for is a modification that's consistent with the current situation.
In recent months, the legislature has made several attempts to alleviate the restrictions brought on by COVID-19. Why has this been such a significant issue, drawing support by both sometimes Republicans and Democrats?
Well, I think that all of us have heard from our constituents because they look at the same scenario that I outlined earlier, where it's okay to go to Walmart, but you can't go to a smaller store because of what they sell. And for them, it just doesn't make sense. And I agree. We've always wanted transparency and consistency when it comes to businesses. That's what drove many of the business-related bills that we worked on. And as we worked through them, it became very apparent to people, that we were working through those issues. It became very apparent to people that it just didn't always make sense. I think there's a smarter way to go about this. We've offered some solutions. Unfortunately, many of them have been vetoed, and we'll keep working on them as we go forward. We have sessions scheduled again in a week, and then obviously we can come back in anytime as needed.
While this issue is being considered in the courts, what kind of guidance would you provide for perhaps small business owners that are in a county that is currently designated yellow? What would you tell them to do moving forward?
Well, that's really a question for the governor because since he's not following the existing law, it's difficult to guess where he may or may not follow the other laws as well. I encourage him to work with us as we go forward, but I think that they should obviously consult counsel. I think that's always the first step to understand what some of these executive orders mean. Because remember, not all of the executive orders were necessarily drafted under the Emergency Management Code. Some of them were drafted under the Disease Prevention Act. And that's important because that's an entirely different construct. Some of the health issue related orders, and some of them were issued concurrently under both. And with that, you have to kind of go through that. Our lawyers are going through that as well. I think the simplest answer is to have the governor redefine the order, terminate the original disaster as he's required under law, and then redefine the order going forward to be more consistent all across the state.
Representative Bryan Cutler, House Majority Leader, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Fran.
We are here with the Executive Director of the PIAA, Dr. Bob Lombardi. And Dr. Lombardi, before we get into the information that was released this week coming out of Governor Wolf's office, I just want to kind of take a step back. I'm going to go back actually to your board meeting a couple weeks ago in the month of May. And if I could take a central theme out of that board meeting, it was, let's figure out the best way possible to get kids back playing sports. It sounds a bit of an oversimplification, but I think it's important for people to know that that really is the central theme of what everybody at the PIAA is trying to do.
No, Bob, you're right on the money. When we had our board meeting on May 20th, there was an impassioned plea by District 11 Chairman Bob Hartman. He came out and said, let's allow kids to be kids. Let them do what they like to do best. And that's be involved in school activities. And athletics is a big part of that. So he made an impassioned plea because the discussion started, well, what if some areas of the state are green and some are yellow and some are red? Should we try a common date and those type of things? And it was the feeling of the board is the more students that we can get involved to start and get back on their campus on a voluntary basis to let kids be kids a good thing. And I think what we found out this week was a bonus was the recommendations of the guidelines said yellow and green. So it got all 67 counties. So that concern about some people not being treated equally as others went away. So that was a great thing.
Right. And so the directive comes out this week, and I think it's important for people to know that the directive comes not just from Governor Wolf, but it also comes from the Department of Education. And obviously that's a big piece of the puzzle because we are talking about schools, and the PIAA is obviously answerable to what the schools are doing. But in essence, what the main focus of it all, when it's all said and done, was that each school has to come up with its own health plan and its own return to play plan, get it run by its school board, its board of governors. And ultimately, once that is approved and in play, then the athletes can return to those voluntary team workouts. But the onus is now on the schools. So the question I have coming out of that is, did the schools know that that was going to be the case? Because I think some people were thinking that somehow or another that the PIAA was going to be the czar of all of this and come up with these directives. But ultimately, the onus is on the schools. And did the schools know well in advance of this that was going to be a part of it?
Yes, I think this has been talked about ever since that board meeting. But subsequently, we've had other conversations, meeting with the executive committee of the Athletic Directors Association. We told them, hey, if you're not, you need to start working on a plan. I know our chief operating officer, Mark Byers, last Friday was involved with an AD's conversation and said, hey, folks, make sure that you're starting to put some things in place. And then to the end of that, last Friday was the 5th, we put out a press release and we sent to every school through Constant Contact, folks, please start thinking about establishing a plan for return to play voluntary for over the spring or summer activities, because we had a feeling that either Tuesday or Wednesday, the governor, through his press conference, issued that he was going to make a statement. So we wanted to give them a heads up. So on Friday, we gave that information. By doing that on Friday, a lot of people took it to heart and put some things in place that, and you're exactly right. Once they established the plan, accepted by the board or their governing body or their governing board, and posted to the school website, they can start voluntary workouts. And my understanding is there's a few schools that are already up and running. And to me, that's terrific because right now it's voluntary. The beauty of it is, in many places, kids don't have the opportunity to get in a weight room because they don't have facilities in their communities. So this gets the kid back in front of his coach, who's certified, has background clearances, cardiac clearances, as well as concussion clearances, and those people are certified. So instead of forcing kids away from their school activities, I think it's important to keep them involved in our school.
Yeah, there's no more reason for kids to be out there bench pressing the family dog. They need to get into a weight room and be doing the certified plans that obviously they all want to be doing, and obviously the schools want them to be doing it as well. And so this is the first step in that process. And of course, it doesn't mean that this is the now canon law that will be placed in play in September. There will things that will ultimately evolve out of this. But I think one of the big things and one of the big question marks for all of this is testing. Obviously, athletes are going to need to be tested before they can practice, before they can play. And that's going to bring in a whole nother aspect of things, and that is the expense of that and the expense of testing. In your thought process, as you guys continue to plan as to what may happen and what kind of loopholes may come into all this, the thought process of the expense of testing, and there will probably be schools that don't want to run the risk of all this. Do you foresee that there will be some schools come the fall who will ultimately make the decision not to have fall sports?
Wait, you're asking me to look in a crystal ball and read people's minds, and that's a difficult thing to do. And I don't want to really offer conjecture on that, Bob, because whatever I would say, A or B, could be wrong. But as part of their plan to return to activity for voluntary workouts, schools have to develop some type of pre-screening protocol. And I think that pre-screening can be as simple as an interview, or in some cases they have documents, questions and answers that need to be filled out. And then as they monitor their athletes daily, I think by setting this foundation, that helps answer your question come the fall, because if schools are doing it properly and the kids are showing up, they're going to have an 8 to 10 week history of each kid coming on their campus and what they have or haven't done or been exposed to. So I think that will soften the toughness of making a final decision there. I think it'll give them a good amount of information from a health history background that will assist in making those decisions. And I think that's why Wednesday was such a big day. It was a great day for student athletes in Pennsylvania because they can go back to, this is a good day. They can go back to being themselves.
And I think the other question that comes out of it, and again, I don't want to put that crystal ball back in place again, but obviously the newest word and the newest two words in the vocabulary of everyone in the world these days is social distancing. Some sports lend themselves to social distancing, sports like golf and tennis, as opposed to a sport like football. But right now, you know that what you're looking at is getting kids back to playing and not worrying about whether or not they can do this or whether they can't do this. Right now, the onus is put your plan in place and get kids back to playing some kind of sports.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is set the foundation for the fall. And to be cognizant of trying to do this in a systematic type of approach that we build success, continue to get good health history, and keep people safe so that we set the foundation to start fall. We don't want to see people bend the rules and cause a setback that will negatively impact the systematic progression to start. Does that make sense to you? I think that is the biggest key here for people to do. And I think because students and their families and communities have been sitting idle since March 13th, they're going to do their best efforts to try to make sure that everybody's on the same page and keep people safe so they can start this. Because you yourself, the last 3 months, been tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
You're trying to.
It's a world I'm not familiar with, and it's not really sitting all that well with me, to be quite honest with you. But it is the world in which we're all living, and I'm no different than anyone else. All of a sudden, you go 1,000,000 miles an hour and you come to a screeching halt, just like the athletes are doing. That's what we've all been kind of faced to. But obviously, the problem is that everybody wants to know, am I going to be able to go out and watch my local high school team play in the fall, no matter what that sport is? And the ultimate real answer in all of this is it's just too early to tell that. You're just putting in place an opportunity for kids to get back to do their workouts for the summer in the anticipation, in the hope that you will indeed be able to watch your team play in the fall.
That is absolutely correct. And the beauty of it is, if you can take care of the team and the student and get that foundation, then as far as social distancing or, as you well know, some of the attendance that we have during the regular season is sparse. You named a couple sports that it's really easy to do. But let's take most of our outside activities, field hockey, soccer, even football. I think with the good common sense approach and the abilities that we have of athletic administrators, they can comply with the potential social distancing edicts that will come down the road, and people will be able to see games. We're all cautiously optimistic. I've said it 1,000,000 times because I think it's important for communities and schools to have this done, and I think they're going to rise to the challenge.
And I think the other aspect of it is that everybody really needs to A, take a deep breath, and B, look at their calendar and remind themselves that really right now where we are should be the end of spring sports. So rather than wondering what's going to happen in the fall, understand that spring sports are just and should just be ending right now. This should be a time where I'm going to go out and go and try to work on my abilities to get my golf game better. And all you're doing is screwing with that because of all these things that are going on right now.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your golf game, but I heard there's a couple golf pros around. But with that being said, today, let's take today. Here we are on the 12th of June, and today we should be in our second day of baseball, softball championships up at Penn State and ending the spring sports season. So the beauty of us possibly on Wednesday getting that information and possibly having schools have their plans approved, they're a couple weeks earlier than the initial July 1 edict. So, they got some bonus days, and I think that's helpful. And I think it's important to stress what you said. People have to have patience here. And I think because everyone's been so idle since March 13th, there's not a lot of patience going on because people are antsy. And I get it. We all get it. And if that would occur, I think this could be a seamless transition. Things could work out pretty well, and maybe the fall doesn't look exactly like it used to, but maybe if we get a good percentage of it, the way we comport ourselves at games, the way the media handles themselves, some of those things may change. But I think people would be willing to be adaptable, amenable, cooperative to see that these things occur. They're important to school campuses.
Absolutely. Dr. Robert Lombardi, appreciate your taking the time. I know it's been a busy flurry of activities for you over the course of the last several weeks and getting things in place, but this obviously is a good step forward, and looking forward to having things get back at least to as close as normal as we can with a fall sports season coming up come September.
Our fingers are crossed, and we're all trying to pull in the same direction and be successful as we go through it. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you, Bob. It's always my pleasure.